Memoirs of a Dad, narrated by the author, Hartwell Cowle. Chapter 1. On the 7th of September 1981, in St Mary's Hospital, Manchester, a young woman by the name of Claire Hartwell gave birth to a son. I was the lad's dad. Thomas, which was the name we gave him, was a happy, contented and much-loved boy. His good temper can be judged by the fact that even when he was teething, he somehow managed to do it with a smile. He was loved by both parents, but unfortunately the two parents, mainly because of external circumstances, but also because of a lack of thought on my part, discovered when he was 22 months of age that they could no longer live together. Claire, who was almost 10 years younger than me, wanted to stay in Manchester to be near her son. However, her training was in the sciences of archaeology and social anthropology, and jobs for archaeologists and social anthropologists were few and far between in Manchester at that time, so she needed to retrain, which meant going back to university. It was therefore agreed that Thomas would stay with me in the family home, and I would have responsibility for day-to-day care and control of the lad, whilst his mother would have unlimited access to her son. It must be understood that if anybody who knew me well had been asked if they thought I would make a good parent, they would have laughed at the very idea. I would probably have laughed at it myself. However, they did not know Tom, and the fact is, whether consciously or unconsciously, he successfully trained his father to be a father, and looking back in those early years, I think it is fair to say the lad made quite a good job of it. Both Claire and myself were keen cyclists. Indeed, I'd been cycling from the age of 10, and had always taken it seriously. It had always been my main means of transport, both for work and for leisure. The bike, in fact, was my passport to freedom. It provided me with a means of escape from the dirty, polluted environment of the town in which I lived. I'd always been brought up with one leg in the country and one leg in the town, for throughout my childhood there had never been more than one row of houses between me and open countryside. When I was 16 in 1960, all this changed. I moved into Gorton, an industrial suburb of Manchester, to commence my engineering apprenticeship in nearby Openshaw. These were the days before the Clean Air Acts, when Manchester, like all the other industrial towns of Lancashire, was a filthy, dirty, smoke-ridden place. There wasn't a clean building in the town. The town hall was jet black with filthy soot from the sulphurous smoke of countless factories, as was every other civic building. Many a November night you would come out of work to pick your way home through a blanket of thick smog, a handkerchief, which within 3 minutes had turned from white to black, clutched your nose, your eyes unable to penetrate the darkness to more than a yard in front of you. For many, bus travel became free, although exceedingly slow, the conductor having to walk in front of the bus with a lamp to guide the driver and to protect errant pedestrians from being run down. The bicycle was absolutely essential to me, as it was to thousands of others, because it provided an escape from this filth into quieter, more natural, and far cleaner countryside. Both Claire and myself had agreed that the birth of our son would not compromise our enjoyment and love of the great outdoors. Thus Tom, from the age of about 5 months, when he first had the strength to hold his own head up, had been used to sitting in a child seat on the back of his father's bike. And once I became a single parent, that situation was not altered. Every Sunday or bank holiday would find us on some ride or other, whether it be in rural Cheshire, the hills of the Peak District, or the wild moorland areas of nearby West Yorkshire. At this stage in my life, I began increasingly to ride out on a Sunday with the Abbotsford Park Cycling Club, or the South Manchester Cyclist Touring Club. But as Tom grew larger and heavier, I found it increasingly difficult to keep up with the riders in these clubs, and turned to riding on my own, excepting for the company of my son. Ironically, perhaps, we began to cycle further afield, and it wasn't unusual for us to enjoy cycling holidays for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, not only in our own country, but in Scotland and Wales, and also in France. During this period I was earning my living as a builder of made-to-measure bicycle frames and custom bicycles, having been liberated from wage slavery by the Engineering Employers Federation, who were ably assisted by the free and private enterprise version of the Stasi, then known as the Economic League. This latter organisation had been founded by employers as an anti-socialist propaganda outfit. After the First World War, assisted by leading members of naval intelligence, it became a spy organisation within industry and organised blacklists of workers who engaged in legitimate but unwelcome political and trade union activity. As a consequence of this malevolence on the part of my would-be masters, I was able to organise my working hours around the needs of my son, especially as I had the invaluable assistance and expertise of a childminder, namely Joan Chandler, to whom I will always be grateful. When Tom was about 3.5 years of age, I had just completed the building of a tandem for friends of mine, and they told me that because of family circumstances, they couldn't pick it up for a month, and suggested I might make use of it. It was coming up to Easter, and I decided I would take Tom camping in Edale in Derbyshire. I was determined from the start that Tom should have his feet in the pedals. The problem was how to fit him onto what was an adult frame. The answer, as any tandem riding parent knows, is by means of kiddie cranks, which are clamped onto the rear seat tube of the bike and then connected by chain to the main drive chain. Thus, when the adult pedals, so the child's pedals rotate also. This has the advantage of keeping the child's leg muscles supple and teaches them the art of pedalling, whilst keeping them warm at the same time. So, having quickly cobbled together a set of kiddie cranks, we were ready for the off, and much to my delight, Tom obviously enjoyed the experience. I therefore determined to build us a tandem to celebrate his forthcoming 4th birthday, and as it happened, I managed to build it on time and have it ready for that event. From that point on, our cycling adventures really began, and Tom's essential characteristics began to come to the fore. However, before I begin to relate some of those adventures, there are one or two that took place whilst he was still in a child seat. At that period in my life, I had many friends who were walkers rather than cyclists, and it had become an habit for us to meet on the 2 principal bank holidays of the year, namely Easter and the autumn bank holiday. When I first became a single parent, Tom was still in nappies at night, although he was no longer in them during the day, and me being rather a naive parent, found it a great dilemma how to deal with this question, particularly as we were about to embark on a camping holiday in Brothers Water at the foot of the Kirkstone Pass. We set out from Manchester on the train to Windermere, suitably armed with sleeping bags and a tent and Tom's titty bottle, usually filled with orange juice, which he used as a comforter whilst on the back of the bike. Everything went well. The train was on time. We disembarked from the train at Windermere and set out on our journey, which would take us up the Kirkstone Pass, where I planned to have a break at the Kirkstone Inn before descending down to Brothers Water. As we began the climb up the Kirkstone Pass, a bit of a gale blew in from the Irish Sea. The wind was against us, and I was struggling. I had to stand up in the pedals to force the bike upwards, fighting the twin forces of gravity and a hard wind against us. Inevitably, when you stand out of the saddle in the pedals, the bicycle rocks from side to side. This always had the effect of sending Tom to sleep, and about 2/3 up the pass, I heard the distinct noise of his titty bottle falling onto the road and beginning to descend the hill in the opposite direction to which we were going. I decided to carry on, knowing that there was a shop on the campsite and they undoubtedly would have a titty bottle. Eventually we managed to get to the shelter of the Kirkstone Inn, and I treated myself to a pint and got an orange juice for Tom, and then some of our friends came into the pub. They naturally suggested that Tom should descend the hill to Brothers Water in their car, because by that point the wind had brought in rain, and it was raining quite heavily. Eventually we booked into the campsite, had managed to get the tent erected, and went to the shop. Much to my chagrin, they didn't have a titty bottle. More importantly, they did not have any disposable nappies either, and I completely relied on being able to obtain them. So, immediately I am faced with a problem. 1, how to make Tom comfortable in going to sleep, because he was used to having a titty bottle as a comforter. I should explain that Claire and myself had agreed that he should not have a dummy which we regarded as an unhygienic commodity. And the second problem, of course, was what if he wet himself in the night? Although the little shop did not have the items I required, they did have a dummy, so I thought that I should in fact break our rule and let him have that to pacify him whilst he went to sleep. Much to my amazement, in the morning, and great delight I must admit, Tom was absolutely dry, and it finally hit me that the fact that he hadn't had a drink to go to bed with had in fact meant that he didn't wet the bed. So the problem was solved, and he was no longer in nappies, and within 2 days I'd weaned him back off the dummy again. Another incident that comes to mind about this time of Tom's life, and also involving travelling on the railway, had happened previous to this incident. In fact, it was during the election campaign earlier in 1983, right at the point where Claire had made her decision to leave the family home. I happened to be standing as the Communist Party candidate in the parliamentary elections, and a meeting had been arranged in London of all the Communist Party candidates for a pre-election discussion. I had no other alternative but to take Tom with me, and we got an early train from Manchester to Euston in order to get to the meeting on time. Everything went well. I should add here that this particular railway journey made it obvious to me that it was much easier for a man to bring up a child than it is for a woman. For example, we went everywhere on the bike, and so when we got onto the train, the first thing to do was to put the bike in the guard's van. They had guard's vans in those days, before privatisation made every bit of space on the train necessary for the conveyance of people. So I parked the bike in the guard's van as usual, unhooked Tom's child seat and carried him through the train, sat in it. I would then place the child seat next to the window and sit down next to him. Inevitably, at some point, I would need to go to the toilet or perhaps go to the restaurant car in order to get some refreshments for both of us. It was very rare indeed if somebody, usually a woman, did not offer to look after Tom while I made this short journey. If I had been female, however, they would not have dreamt of interfering, because it was normal to see a woman with a child, whereas to see a man on his own with a child was quite a different thing. Anyway, we arrived in London and made our way to the Friends Meeting House where the meeting was being held. Tom sat on my knee as usual, and throughout the journey and cycling across London, he'd been perfectly happy. However, as soon as the chairman began to open the meeting, Tom decided it was time to have his say, and he began to heckle. Now, sat in front of me was a famous trade union leader. Some people would describe him as a notorious trade union leader, for it was none other than Mick McGahey, the president of the Scottish Miners and vice president of the National Union of Miners. Mick Magee was very unusual amongst trade union leaders, for although there were many trade union leaders who were members of the Communist Party, there were very few of them who actually took a part in Communist Party political life. Mick Magee was proud to stand as a Communist Party candidate in the public arena, and was both a local and parliamentary candidate. On hearing our Tom beginning to strike, he turned round to me and said, "Let me have him," except he did it, of course, with an Edinburgh accent, and I haven't got an Edinburgh accent. So I handed Tom over, and he held him under the armpits, and he stood him on his knees, and he smiled at him, and our Tom made a grab for his big craggy nose. And Mick sat him down on his knee, and the lad was as quiet as a mouse throughout the rest of the meeting. Which, as everybody who knows our Tom will testify, is a very unusual occurrence indeed.